Pakistan came into existence as a country because of Islam and the Islamic beliefs of its founders and citizens. Through circumstances, I came to understand Islam better than I had done in my youth, which led me to understand Pakistan, to appreciate its history and the course it was taking. As I learned more about Islam and about being a Muslim, it became clear to me that I was on a path, one that would lead me to greater engagement with the political life of my country. A spiritual person takes on responsibility for society, whereas a materialist only takes responsibility for himself. In Pakistan, I often came across people who had some sort of spiritual experience or were deeply religious. This was especially true of the elders in our family. My mother started to become more spiritual when I was about 10 years old. She and her sister met a female Sufi from Sahiwal, a district south of Lahore, and used to travel to visit her quite regularly. Spiritual guides, or pars, are quite common in Pakistan. Millions of people, particularly in rural areas of the country, follow them, consulting them on everything from religious matters to sickness and family problems. My mother always tried to encourage me to follow my religion, but it was hard for her to relate to me in the way that I can relate to my children, as she had no way of really comprehending the impact of the competing cultural forces in my life. With my sons, I can understand what it means to grow up a Muslim in today's Western society. Meanwhile, my father was also religious, but in a different way. While he had immense respect for the great Sufi saints of the subcontinent, he believed in a direct relationship with God and didn't feel he needed a spiritual intermediary or a guide as my mother and her sister did. I had my first spiritual experience when I was nearly 14 and already quite skeptical about religion and God. My mother was so excited because her spiritual guide Pirge came to visit us in Lahore for the first and last time. She introduced me to Pirge, hoping she would pray for me and offer me guidance. The woman was sitting on the floor with 3 or 4 of her disciples, her head covered by a chador. She never looked up at me, and I never saw her face. She did not say anything for a few minutes, and then suddenly said I had not finished the Quran. Only the Maulvi who came to teach me the Quran knew that I had not finished it. My Quran lessons used to be after school, and the last thing I wanted to do at the time was to read the Quran. All I wanted to do was to go and play with my cousins in Zaman Park. After a year, the poor Maulvi accepted that I was a hopeless case. And one day we both schemed to tell my parents that I had finally finished the Quran. My mother looked at me and immediately knew from my shocked face that her spiritual guide was spot on. Fauji told my mother not to worry, that I was a decent soul and would turn out all right. I saw the relief pass across my mother's face. Pirji went on to say that I would be very famous and make my mother a household name. When my mother died 21 years later of cancer, I built a hospital in her name, and today the Shaukat Khanum Memorial Hospital is renowned across Pakistan. The sense of achievement I was to feel when this hospital opened was far greater than anything I had achieved in cricket. It gave me a surge of pure happiness. The overhaul of my lifestyle from that of a sports star to a humanitarian worker and politician. But as I began my spiritual journey, I started to discover happiness comes from all those things that are considered to be boring by the mass media and the culture of self-indulgence. It promotes giving charity, helping others, family life, and achieving selfless goals. My mother's long and painful death in 1985 was the catalyst for this change in me, a turning point in my life, forcing me to face up to my utter helplessness as I tried to ease her suffering. I first heard the news of my mother's cancer when my sister Alema called me in the summer of 1984. What had been initially diagnosed in Pakistan as a stomach infection had turned out to be cancer of the colon. I was in England at the time recovering from the stress fracture in my shin bone. I brought my mother to the UK for treatment, but by the time we took her back home in September, the cancer had spread to her liver. Her last 6 weeks were very painful, and even today I have to block from my mind the memories of this time. Out of sheer desperation and helplessness, I would beg the Almighty for help. All my family prayed for her too. So vulnerable was I that I even brought home a faith healer who turned out to be a complete quack. There was, I soon realized, a whole industry existing in Pakistan of quacks, faith healers and fake spiritualists who prey on vulnerable people. For a few months after my mother's death, I completely removed from my mind the idea of God. However, My internal debate about whether he existed or not later resumed. I had become embittered towards God. If he did exist, how could he have put my mother through so much pain? She was very religious and had been such a selfless mother. The experience of my mother's death, coupled with my stress fracture, had made me realize how vulnerable I was. The complete faith I had had in my own strength and capabilities was no longer there. It was almost as if someone had put me in my place by making me aware of my many limitations. I again started saying my prayers every morning. This was really like an insurance policy, a sort of safety net in case God really did exist. It is possible that many Muslims suffer from this dilemma. They pray not because they know that there is a God, but because they cannot be certain that there is no God. By this point, my leg had healed and I threw myself back into cricket with all my stored up enthusiasm. Soon I started having the same degree of success as when I had left off. In fact, the long, hard road back to fitness had toughened me up mentally, and what I had lost physically during the 2.5 years I had been out as a bowler because of my injury, I now made up for with much greater mental strength. Just as the body gets stronger by exercise, so does the mind when it encounters resistance. By this time, I had come to the realization that the hedonistic lifestyle that had seemed so appealing from the outside was a mirage. The hurt I caused and the feeling of emptiness I experienced in transitory relationships far outweighed the moments of pleasure. Most of the jet set I knew and socialized with in the 1900s could not face a party unless they had enough alcohol or drugs in their system. It was a world completely cut off from the rest of humanity. I also began to question the things I had always assumed were great fun. The people I was hanging out with had been conditioned by Hollywood-led trends and peer pressure to believe nightclubs, beach and yachting holidays, expensive restaurants and designer clothes made you happy. But parties and nightclubs began to bore me, as did eating out, which had once seemed so much fun. I began to crave home cooking, while years of cricket tours made me hate the sight of hotels. Once I began to change my lifestyle, I realized there was a world of difference between happiness and pleasure seeking. I had mistaken pleasure for happiness, but the former does not last long, and the activities that give it have diminishing returns. Over the years, I had seen so many destroy their lives through hedonism. Alcoholism and drug addiction have ruined the potential of so many pop, film, and sports stars. I could easily have slid down that slippery slope, entering that world as I did as an impressionable 18-year-old, just as the sex, drugs, and rock and roll revolution was at its peak. What saved me from disaster was cricket, and therefore never indulged too deeply in that lifestyle. I also had too much self-respect to allow myself to be humiliated on the cricket field due to overindulgence elsewhere. My strong family roots, and above all, my mother's powerful influence, and the fear of humiliating both my immediate and extended family helped me exercise self-control. I discovered that it is the environment we grow up in that influences what we enjoy in life, and I began to rediscover how much I loved trekking in Pakistan's northern mountains in the summer and partridge shooting in the salt range in the winter. Similarly, after all the fancy restaurants I have eaten in, what I really enjoy is the food in the cheap truck drivers' cafes on the intercity highways in Pakistan. This is where the men who drive the famously colorful Pakistani trucks stop to sit on charpoys, bed frames strung with rope, and eat spicy food with mugs of hot sweet chai. The dishes are simple dal, mutton or chicken cooked in desi ghee, clarified butter. They are typically all made from local ingredients and freshly cooked, which is why they are so good. Even better is the food I have eaten in the old city of Lahore. No food in the entire Indian subcontinent can match that. Perhaps it's no surprise, then, given my love for it, that it was while I was in the Pakistani countryside that I met the first of the men who would become my spiritual guides. The first man I met was not exactly a guide, but the encounter. And what he told me so astonished me that it led to my next encounter as I became more open to the ideas these extraordinary men introduced me to. The spiritual journey I embarked on I regard as intrinsic to my history of Pakistan, because it was only when I understood fully the spiritual inheritance of the nation from the principles of Islam expounded by its founders that I was able to see and comprehend the nature of the history unfolding in front of me and my place in it. In 1997, the year I had announced my initial retirement from cricket, I was on a shooting trip with a couple of friends some 100 miles north of Lahore. After the shoot, Our host suggested that I meet a spiritual man who lived in a village on the way back home. I saw no point in it, but at the other's insistence, I agreed to see him. The man, whose name was Baba Chala, lived in a little village just a few miles from the Indian border. He was short, with piercing eyes and a happy face. He did not know who I was, as nobody in the village had a television, and besides, he did not look like the type of person who would be into cricket. He certainly had not heard about my retirement, despite it having been headline news. My host asked him what I should do after cricket. The man looked at me and said I had not left my profession. We all told him that I had retired and had no intention of playing again. The man said, "It is the will of Allah, you are still in the game." He then turned to one of my friends, Mohammed Siddiq, and told him that he would be double-crossed in a business deal and that he should immediately take his money out of the project, but that things would eventually be resolved. He shocked him further by telling him the actual amount of money involved. We left his place perplexed. What we found most difficult to comprehend was how he knew the exact amount of money involved in Siddiq's project. 3 months later, at a dinner given for the cricket team in Islamabad, General Zia asked me to take back my decision to retire for the sake of the country and again captain Pakistan. Within weeks, I was leading the national team on a tour of the West Indies, and my friend's business dealings unfolded as Baba Chala had predicted. How could that man in the village have known? I kept thinking. My mind also went back to my mother's spiritual guide, who had been able to tell that I had not finished the Quran. Just over a year after that, I came across someone who would become the single most powerful spiritual influence on me and completely change my direction in life. A friend in Lahore had invited me for lunch. The only other guest was a frail-looking, clean-shaven man in his 60s by the name of Mian Bashir. The lines on his face showed that he had seen a lot of suffering. He was a retired junior civil servant who I was told was struggling to make ends meet on his meager pension. The man sat quietly throughout lunch with a disinterested look on his face. After lunch, he politely asked me if I constantly read a certain verse from the Quran. I told him I hadn't even heard of the verse. His face went into a deep frown. He closed his eyes, took on an expression of concentration, and then said, "Sorry, it was your mother who would read that verse for your protection." With astonishment, I realized that he was absolutely right. When I was a child, before I went to sleep, my mother would repeat a verse from the Quran 3 times and blow on me. He went on to say that I was protected because of it. Then he told me a couple of incidents about my family, about which no one else could have known, and too personal to relate here. I asked him how he acquired this skill. It is the will of Allah. At times he shows me something even without my asking for it. Other times I beg him for knowledge about some subject and he refuses me, he replied. I was really curious. I wanted to know more. Mian Bashir's father had died when he was barely 2 years old. His mother really struggled to look after him, as the father's share of the family property was fraudulently acquired by his uncles. From the age of about 7, Mian Bashir would occasionally see visions which he could not interpret properly. He met a man at this juncture who told him to read the Quran and spend more time praying and meditating about Allah. There are no coincidences in life. That man was meant to guide me towards Allah, he told me. By the time he was 12, even the school teachers were overawed by his power to see what others could not. He dropped out of school and for the next few years made it his mission to expose professional powers who, like the commercial Indian gurus, make money off insecure and vulnerable people. He would put out newspaper adverts, issuing a challenge to match their spiritual powers with his, and expose these frauds who thrive on the poor villagers of Punjab and Sindh. Over the next year or so, I met Mian Bashir a few times. He fascinated me. Like my mother's guide, he was an unassuming and unprepossessing person who wore his wisdom lightly. He was extremely humble and would take great pains to tell me that he had no such art of looking into the future or the past. Instead, he said that when he meditated and begged Allah to help him, he would occasionally lift the veil, but it was always to help people in distress. Nothing, he said, can happen without Allah's will. Each meeting with him would leave me more convinced about the existence of God. I had been so angry since my mother's death, and here was a man helping to answer many of the questions that had been torturing me. Over a period of 2 or 3 years, he resolved many of the issues which for me had been an impediment to faith. The difference between the way I learned about Islam from him and the way I had been taught at school or by the Maulvis who used to come and teach me the Quran at home was that he never insisted on any religious rituals. He never told me to pray 5 times a day or to fast at Ramadan, never insisted I read the Quran. Instead, he explained what lay behind the rites. He knew that one cannot force external demonstrations of religiosity, as otherwise they are just empty rituals. The internal change must come first. And he let me develop my faith in my own time. Sometimes it took 6 months for me to truly understand something he had said, but he never hurried me. What appealed to me about him was that he had no ulterior motive. The only reason he was leading me towards spirituality was for my own good, rather than making himself indispensable to me, as some fake religious gurus do. He told me I would ask him to pray for me, and he would insist that I pray myself, or I would ask his advice, and rather than giving it to me, he would tell me to pray to God for direction. He never asked for a thing and would say that any religious person who charged people money was a quack, just as somebody who is blessed with wealth is morally obliged to share it with others. Mian Bashir believed that somebody with his kind of blessing was obliged to use it to help people. Mian Bashir, who died in 2005, also had a very poor opinion of those preachers who, by laying so much emphasis on rituals, would completely miss out on the essence of religion. Some, according to him, had made religion into a profession and were there not to guide people but to profit from them. He also felt that they condemned people too quickly and actually made them scared of religion. The Quran, he said, was supposed to be a blessing for mankind. It was not to make life more difficult. You cannot drill people to have faith. Their hearts and minds have to be penetrated. Faith is the greatest gift of Allah. He also taught me that any belief system that failed to instill compassion was not real religion, or had failed to touch the person internally. So much harm is done in the world by people who treat religions as competing ideologies. Yet all religious messages teach humanity, selflessness, and justice. People who kill in the name of religion are no different from the materialists who fight in the name of communism, national socialism, or capitalism. So now I had come to the realization that there was a God, but I had to do the reading to understand the religion that had been sidelined in my Western-style education. Mian Bashir had never finished school. So other than the Quran, he was not in a position to advise me on what to read to deepen my knowledge. My need to explore the religion was spurred on by the furor in 190-80 and 190-89 over Salman Rushdie's The Satanic Verses. Muslims understandably found the book deeply offensive in its satirical portrayal of the Prophet Muhammad. It hurt even more because Rushdie was from a Muslim Indian family and must have known the outrage it would cause. You cannot hide behind freedom of speech to humiliate an entire religion and cause so much hurt. Most Muslims felt insulted and responded by refusing to read the book, but there was always going to be an extreme reaction from certain quarters. Every society is made up mainly of moderates, but has its extremists, and the extremist elements of the Islamic world erupted. Only a minuscule proportion of the international Muslim community reacted with violence, but all 1.3 billion Muslims were tarnished. Translators of the book were killed or attacked in Japan, Italy, and Norway. In Pakistan, several people died when Islamists attacked the American Cultural Center in Islamabad. In Bradford, Muslim immigrants, many of them British Pakistanis, burned copies of the book. British Muslim groups campaigned unsuccessfully to have the book banned in the UK, as the country's blasphemy law protected only Christian beliefs. Most famously, Iran's Khomeini declared a fatwa, or religious ruling, condemning Rushdie and the book's publishers to death and calling on Muslims to execute them immediately wherever they might be. Tehran put up a bounty for Rushdie's head. Khomeini's fatwa was condemned by a variety of religious scholars, leaders and groups, including the Organization of the Islamic Conference, the intergovernmental body that represents Muslim countries, while blasphemy, according to some interpretations of the Quran, is punishable by death. The fatwa violated various laws in Islamic jurisprudence, which states the need for a fair trial to allow the accused to defend themselves and repent. The Western public was puzzled by such fury, being absolutely clueless about how much love, respect, and reverence Muslims have for the Prophet. Most Muslims live by this book of guidance, so therefore take any criticism of it as an attack on their whole way of life. Blame the intelligentsia and leaders of the Muslim world for not making clear to Western countries how hurtful the Satanic Verses affair was. The OIC, Organization of the Islamic Conference, An association of Muslim states should have sent a delegation to the European Union and asked Congress to explain to them the offense caused by slandering the Prophet. Otherwise, how could the West understand when in many Western countries people are allowed to make fun of religious figures? The Jewish leadership has been very effective in making it clear that the Holocaust, which understandably causes them so much pain. The Muslim elite should have followed their example. There was nobody to defend the religion, though, and Islam was under attack. With people in the West drawing comparisons with the book Burning of Nazi Germany, I didn't have the depth of knowledge to defend it either. While leading Pakistan on a tour of New Zealand, at the time I was constantly being asked about whether Islam was a violent religion. So I started reading books about Islam and found that my mind was more stimulated than it had ever been. The poet philosopher integral to the founding of Pakistan, and Ali Shariati, an Iranian writer and sociologist who regarded himself as a disciple of Iqbal, both believed in Islam's potential for creating a just society, as had been seen during what is known as the Golden Age of Islam in the first 500 years after the Prophet's death. The more I read, which has many layers of meaning, I was also drawn to the writing of Charles Legay Eaton, a British convert, a former diplomat, writer and broadcaster. Eaton was one of the foremost Muslim intellectuals of the West. His writing did much to emphasize Islam's spirituality and undermine the religious arguments of ideologues and extremists. And together with the example of his own life story, provided a bridge between East and West and demonstrated how Islam could contribute positively to British society. As his obituary in The Guardian put it, refusing to conform to the dictates of any ethnic or cultural model imported from abroad. This impeccable Englishman showed far more effectively than any amount of theory that Islamic faith is fully compatible with British identity. Because my roots were Islamic, but my education was Western. What appealed to me about Eaton was his experience of and views on Islam as a Westerner. A convert's experience of Islam is purely spiritual rather than cultural. A lot of scholars in the Islamic world labor under the burden of culture and history and can be too influenced by both. As Eaton himself says in his introduction to his book Islam and the Destiny of Man, one who enters the community of Islam by choice rather than by birth sinks roots into the ground of the religion, the Quran and the traditions of the Prophet, but the habits and customs of the Muslim peoples are not his. He lacks their strengths and is immune from their weaknesses, immune above all from the psychological complexes which are the result of their recent history. Besides Eaton, another convert who fascinated me was Muhammad Asad, who was born an Austrian Jew under the name Leopold Weiss in 1900. Asad was a scholar and diplomat who was given Pakistani citizenship and advised on the drafting of Pakistan's first constitution. My greatest influence at this time, though, was Iqbal, a philosophical descendant of the Eastern sage Rumi, the renowned mystic and poet-philosopher of 13th century Persia, one of the greatest thinkers of modern Islamic history. Iqbal had studied in both East and West and inspired in a generation of Indian Muslims an ardent desire for change. Central to his vision is his philosophy of khudi, ego or selfhood. According to this philosophy, the development of khudi comes about through self-reliance, self-respect, self-confidence, self-preservation, and self-assertion when such a thing is necessary, in the interests of life and the power to stick to the cause of truth, justice, duty. Iqbal ardently believed that human beings were the makers of their own destiny and that the key to destiny lay in one's character. His philosophy was essentially a philosophy of action, and it was concerned primarily with motivating human beings to strive to realize their God-given potential to the fullest degree. An emblem of royalty which denoted a kind of heroic idealism based on daring, pride and honor. It is the king of the birds precisely because it disdains any form of safety or ease. He reminds the younger generation, your abode is not on the dome of the palaces of kings, you are a Shaheen. Live on the mountain cliffs. The second major theme of Iqbal's philosophy that appealed to me, child of a post-colonial world as I was his strong affirmation of freedom and justice. Throughout his life, Iqbal identified himself with the oppressed people of the world and urged his fellow Muslims to rebel against all forms of tyranny, be it religious, political, cultural, intellectual, economic, or any other. Islam whose very name means the submission or surrender of oneself to God, implied that Muslims should not surrender their freedom to anything except God. He believed a large part of the Quran's teachings were aimed at freeing human beings from the chains that bound them: traditionalism, authoritarianism, religious, political or economic, tribalism, racism, classism, caste and slavery. This concern is reflected in much of Iqbal's writing. He believed passionately in freedom, which he considered to be the very breath of vital living. In his eyes, a slave nation had no future. In servitude, it is reduced to an almost waterless stream. But in freedom, life is a boundless ocean. He wrote, each country had to chart its own path. On 1 January 1968, amid the build-up to the Second World War, Iqbal made a passionate condemnation of imperialism in a New Year message broadcast on All India Radio. It was just a few months before his death. The tyranny of imperialism struts abroad, covering its face in the massive democracy, nationalism, communism, fascism, and heaven knows what else besides. In every corner of the earth, the spirit of freedom and the dignity of man are being trampled underfoot. The so-called statesmen to whom government and leadership of man were entrusted have proved demons of bloodshed, tyranny and oppression. The rulers whose duty it was to protect and cherish those ideals which go to form a higher humanity, to prevent man's oppression of man and to elevate the moral intellectual level of mankind, having their hunger for dominion and imperial possession, shed the blood of millions and reduced millions to servitude simply in order to pander to the greed and avarice of their own particular groups. After subjugating and establishing their dominion over weaker peoples, they have robbed them of their religions, their morals, of their cultural traditions and their literatures. Then they sowed divisions among them that they should shed one another's blood and go to sleep under the opiate of serfdom, so that the leech of imperialism might go on sucking their blood without interruption. This message is even more relevant today. Reading and understanding all this was an exciting time of discovery for me, but others were rather perplexed. My sisters and particularly my father were amused as they looked upon me as someone who was totally immune to religion. As for my friends, both in Pakistan and England, they started wondering if I had gone a little crazy. They could not understand what had come over me. I didn't fall out with people over it, but after too many passionate arguments, I became frustrated and decided I could not explain faith to people who believe that if something cannot be explained scientifically, then it cannot exist. Faith is something you feel, you cannot explain it. Many assume my transformation was a result of the trauma of reaching the end of my long-running career. My friends knew me to be a rational and completely non-superstitious person, so this passionate belief in the unseen was a mystery for them. Amongst sections of the Westernized elite in Pakistan, if you start to talk about religion, you are automatically branded a mullah. Years later, I was speaking to Yusuf Islam, the former Cat Stevens, and he told me how difficult it was for him when he discovered God. He cut himself off from his past life, stopped singing, dumped his old friends and changed his clothes. It took him a while to come to terms with the change in his thinking and to reconcile it with his environment. It was hard enough for the people who knew me intimately. For the ones who only knew me as a sports star with a playboy reputation, the reaction was even more extreme. I was accused of being a hypocrite, or of suffering from a midlife crisis, or a nervous breakdown. I remember an article in an English-language Pakistani newspaper that compared me with another Pakistani cricketer, Fazal Mahmood. He was the pin-up sportsman of his time and led a glamorous life until his retirement, when he turned to God. I suppose people thought that sometimes a professional sportsman needs to replace one passion in his life with another, and often religion can fill that void. My internal journey had started before I left cricket. I too used to think Mahmood had become a bit weird. Now I realize that, like me, he saw through the glamour of the fast life and began to search elsewhere to satisfy his soul. There is a section of Pakistan's westernized class that is not just secular but actually anti-Islamic, and they use the figure of the mullah or the fundamentalist to attack Islam. Former Turkish Prime Minister Necmettin Erbakan talked about a similar attitude amongst the anti-Islamic elite in Turkey. In an interview, he once described how they started booing and thumping their desks whenever the Prophet was mentioned in Parliament. This part of Pakistani society and its media really went for me, accusing me of being a born-again Muslim. Yet no spiritual transformation happens overnight or comes out of nowhere. It is an inner journey that takes time and is shaped by various events in your life. Neither is it a straightforward journey, and there were times when I relapsed or had doubts. The Quran warns the believer that their faith will be tested by crisis. My mother always knew that one of the things I hated most was being forced to do something. The more somebody tried to make me a better Muslim through fear or pressure, the more I would resist. The Quran specifically states, there is no coercion in religion. You can't force somebody to have faith because it is ultimately a battle for the heart and mind. So, if I became a practicing Muslim, it was because it was a decision I came to by myself after much thought and reflection. I believe that people only really change when their belief system changes. I don't believe that people change because they ever have enough of a pleasure-seeking life. People said that having satiated myself with a life of fun, I had now turned religious. I disagree. In my experience, people never have enough of a fun life. They just get more and more debauched in search of pleasure. Besides, these accusations imply that humans cannot evolve and reform. It is only the strengthening of the will through faith that enables a person to conduct their struggle against earthly desires, what the Prophet called the greater jihad. This is one of the mistakes atheists make. They think that a religious person should be immune to temptation, that the moment he claims to have faith, he should transform into an angel. But actually, the battle has only just begun. It is the beginning of the battle for the soul. When a Muslim prays 5 times a day, he is making a constant plea to God to help him stick to the right path, for saint or sinner. Guide us the straight way, the way of those upon whom thou hast bestowed thy blessings, not of those who have been condemned by thee, nor of those who go astray. Quran 1:6. It is a constant reformation of one's character. I have rarely seen people be changed by seeing psychiatrists. According to Charles Legay Eaton, psychiatry is the study of the soul by those people who have no understanding of the soul. Most drug addicts and alcoholics struggle to control their habits despite repeated visits to rehab clinics. My friend Prince Jagat Singh of Jaipur died in his 40s after struggling with alcoholism and going in and out of such expensive facilities. His problem was that he had a directionless and meaningless life and a dissatisfied soul. No rehab clinic is going to help with that. But I have met a lot of people who have changed completely when their souls have been touched by faith. I benefited hugely from the direction of Mian Bashir during this journey of mine. Faith without direction, and especially wisdom, can produce fanatics, self-righteous bores. Guidance from a proper scholar is most important. Hence the tremendous respect given to scholars in Islam, Timur or Tamburlaine, the Turco-Mongol conqueror who was one of the greatest butchers in the history of mankind, would ensure that all the scholars were protected before massacring a city's population. Throughout Muslim history, scholars could travel to any part of the Islamic world and be received with great respect wherever they went. Mian Bashir used to laugh at me and say, "Think how long it took you to believe. You want others to understand you in a few minutes." He would urge me to recall these words from the Quran, say, "I worship not that which you worship, nor will you worship that which I worship unto your religion. And unto me my religion." Quran 9:1-6. He explained to me that the basic requirements of the Quran are that the human believes in one God, the day of judgment, the hereafter, and does good deeds to help others. Several times the Quran refers to Muslims as those who believe and do good deeds. Following religious rituals without doing good deeds makes them meaningless. Inspired by this idea, after my final retirement from cricket, I began to work on building the hospital in my mother's name in earnest. However, my way of life was still not exactly Islamic. Despite being well aware of this, never told me to change my ways. Not once did he give me a sermon about praying, reading the Quran, or living a pious life. All he would say was that nothing would please Allah more than the hospital I was building for the poor. When he used to see me worrying about the project's many obstacles, he would reassure me by saying Allah would solve my problems and that he always rewarded good intentions backed by effort. He also reassured me when every now and then my faith wavered. Even the Prophet had doubts in the beginning. It was his wife Khadija who assured him that his meeting with the angel Gabriel was real and that he was not going mad. He told me, Mian Bashir may have had an ability to see into the future, but it was his wisdom and absolute belief in the existence of God that had a real impact on me. He also helped in removing one of the biggest impediments to my having faith in God. I simply could not picture him. As I grew older, It became much harder to believe that anyone could be so powerful as to create the entire universe and control everything that happened with his will. Mian Bashir simply quoted the Quran, "Far exalted is he above all that you attribute to him," and told me that the human mind is not capable of comprehending Allah. So it was futile to try to picture him. Instead, one should try to understand him through the 99 names given to him in the Quran describing his qualities. He told me that it was also impossible to imagine the angels, hell or heaven. I also discussed with Mian Bashir an issue that had bothered me for a long time. It was about the immoral believer and the moral atheist. I had met so many moral and principled people in the West who did not believe in God, and in Pakistan there was no dearth of believers who prayed 5 times a day and yet indulged in every immoral activity. His answer was that when prayers become a mechanical ritual and fail to touch the soul, a man can struggle to resist his material and animal desires. A lot of people who are religious are not actually convinced that there is a God. As for those who do not believe in God and yet are moral, he felt that morals are ingrained into a person by their parents, school, or even society, but that ultimately all morality originates from religion. According to him, there is no such thing as moral atheism. Once people are cut off from religious values, a society's morals will eventually degenerate. I asked Mian Bashir how he could tell which verse of the Quran my mother would read to me when I was a child. He stressed over and over again that he could only see what Allah allowed him to see. He told me there were times he would meditate and beg Allah for some knowledge to guide someone, but it would be denied to him. When I asked him about how he acquired these powers, he simply said, through devotion to Allah. He would go on to explain that since he has all knowledge, when a man gets close to him, he allows him to see what others cannot. Quran 3, 179 and 72, 26, 27. He said not everyone can acquire this knowledge though. Some can try as hard as they can and still not get anywhere. For ordinary mortals, this knowledge can be acquired through isolation and ascetic discipline. Reading the biography of the 12th century Andalusian mystic Muhammad ibn Arabi helped me understand Mian Bashir's gift better. Ibn Arabi referred to those that see with 2 eyes. He believed that after a process of spiritual discipline, somebody could reach a state during meditation in which they received direct knowledge from Allah. I also started to read about Sufism. Sufism is too big a subject to delve into in this book. But these beautiful lines from the mystic poet Rumi reflect what he calls the inner journey of man and the ascent of the human soul. People who know about mysticism will understand about the journey of the soul towards God. Low in the earth, I lived in realms of ore and stone, and then I smiled in many tinted flowers, then roving with the wild and wandering hours, o'er earth and air and ocean-s zone, in a new birth, I dived and flew. And all the secrets of my essence drew within a form that brought them all to view, and a man, and then my goal. Beyond the clouds, beyond the sky, in realms where none may change or die in angel form, and then away beyond the bounds of night and day. And life and death, unseen or seen, where all that is hath ever been, as one and whole. Mian Bashir taught me to deal with aspects of Sufism that I couldn't understand by accepting that we are not all-knowing, that we need to have humility. The arrogance that we are meant to know everything only demonstrates the superficiality of our knowledge. Throughout the history of mankind, people have claimed absolute truths. Things later prove to be wrong. There is a dimension that is beyond science, logic, and modern education. And we should not assume that what cannot be proved does not exist. The more knowledge you have, the more you should realize how little you know. I find that people who are deeply knowledgeable like Mian Bashir are deeply humble. For me, the internal conflict was over from this point onwards. Now there was just this burning desire to understand God. I asked Mian Bashir where I should start. Why did you not ask me to do so before? I asked. You were not ready, came the reply. The Quran only makes sense to those who are searching for the truth, not those cynics who read it to disprove it. For someone who believes in reason and logic, it is difficult to blindly believe that the Quran is the word of God. It was simultaneously reading the Quran and the fascinating life of the Prophet that convinced me about its divine origin. Whenever I did not understand anything in the Quran, I would ask for Mian Bashir's guidance. He would explain complex issues in very simple terms. Over a period of time, he answered most of the questions that had been bothering me about the existence of God. One of these was why was there is a God, was there so much suffering in the world? The answer came, when you have faith, there is a hereafter which is eternal. God is not here to save us from difficulties, but to give us the strength to overcome them. Years later, my son Suleiman, when aged about 12, asked me the same question. Other questions that I had were answered by reading the Quran. The book that had seemed so difficult to get interested in now offered jewels of wisdom on every page. Having said this, I admit in all humility that I do not have answers to all the questions, and I would like to think that, as the Prophet stated, I will keep learning from the cradle to the grave. Neither do I claim to be an Islamic scholar, but I would like to use the example of my spiritual journey to put right some of the myths and misconceptions about Islam in the West. A great religion has been maligned, thanks not just to ignorance in the Western world, but also ignorance amongst Muslims about Islam's true essence. There is so much debate about moderate and radical Islam, but there is only one Islam. People can be moderates, radicals, or liberals in any human community, but all the world's great religions have at their heart a message of compassion. Faith should be about encouraging all that is noble in a human being. It should enhance both the individual and the community, and is not to be used as a political tool by those greedy for power, as it has been in Pakistan and other Muslim countries or in medieval Europe. I also want to show that terrorism has nothing to do with religion, and certainly nothing to do with the true teachings of Islam. How can mindless butchery and killing be attributed to faith? Islam, like many religions, and for that matter, political ideologies like socialism or communism, has been misused by humans for personal and political gain. For a start, as my faith grew, my entire outlook on life changed, and I began to reform my character. Those who believe that they will be judged by their conduct on this earth in the hereafter will lead their lives differently to those who only believe in the present life. Had this inner transformation not taken place, I would have continued to live a pleasure-seeking existence. I had everything I needed, and with a few months of cricket-related work, like commentary or journalism, I could earn enough money to live a life of complete leisure for the rest of the year. I had always led a self-centered life. I had a handful of friends in Pakistan and England, and made no effort to meet new people and enlarge the circle of people I mixed with. Being shy, I found it difficult to open up with those I did not know very well. My bachelor life suited me well, as not only did it give me a self-contained way of life without any responsibilities, but it also fitted in well with my hedonistic philosophy. I had no desire to have children, as they did not fit in with the way I wanted to live. Most of my married friends had struggled with their marriages, not spent enough time with their children, and had ended up going through really ugly divorces. My future plans had always been based around how I could maximize this existence. Winter months to be spent in Pakistan with family and friends, and partridge shooting the months of June and July in London for the hectic peak of the social season. Well as Lord's Test matches and Wimbledon, then in August, I would be back in Pakistan for traveling in the Karakoram. However, as my faith grew stronger, I began to feel that I had a responsibility to the society I was living in. I found that there were greater goals in life than material and sensual pleasures. I also started to become aware of the fact that the Almighty had been extremely kind to me. I used to always think of all those things that I did not have. But now I realized I had been blessed with so much and needed to give something back. I was heavily influenced by the Quranic injunction, keep the money you need and give the rest away. It took me quite a long time to understand this. Yet within it lies the key to human contentment. Most people cannot distinguish between wants and needs because wants can be limitless. I would see cricketers I had played with, some of whom came from very humble backgrounds, striving to make more and more money even after they left the sport. I realized that it was out of insecurity. For a sportsman in particular, there is usually only a limited time in which one can make a lot of money. These people were caught in a never-ending race where no amount of money was ever going to be enough. It is the same with Pakistan's ruling elite. Some of our politicians are dollar billionaires, yet there is still no end to their greed. What I realized whilst raising funds for the hospital was that the unhappiest people are those whose goals are entirely material. The people who had donated the most were also the ones who were spiritual and seemed most content. I have long since believed that the people who are richest are the people who cannot be bought for any price. The forefathers of many Pakistanis in Sindh and Punjab were Hindus, and before partition, the area that is now Pakistan was a more religiously diverse society, with communities of Muslims, Sikhs, Christians and Hindus living side by side. Now it is about 95–90% Muslim, but there is an especially strong Hindu influence in Sindh. Still home to the majority of Pakistan is Hindus. There is an acceptance of life's lot as a part of the journey in Hinduism. So, in Sindh, a peasant typically accepts this, despite being treated almost as a slave by some Sindhi landlords in parts of Pakistan. Especially Sindh, a sense of Hindu fatalism lingers amongst the peasants, contrary to the impression some Westerners form from the frequent use of the word inshallah, by the will of God, in the Muslim world. Fatalism is not part of Islam. You learn to accept what is past, but you retain control of your future. Iqbal ardently believed that human beings were the makers of their own destiny, and that the key to destiny lay in one's character. Your Khudi elevate to such a height that ere each judgment. God himself asks of his creature, "What is your desire?" he wrote in one of his best-known couplets. In other words, we are masters of our own destiny. The goal of Iqbal's philosophy was not only personal but also social transformation, inspired by the Quranic proclamation, "Toward God is your limit," Surah 53, An-Nam 43. Like many people, I used to torment myself with regrets, obsessing about my mistakes in cricket, racking my brain about what I could have done differently. With faith, I learned to let go of what had already happened, something I've been able to do at two different and very painful times in my life, after the death of my mother and then again following my divorce. The Quran states that those who believe in God will be blessed and protected by God. Surely those who believe, and the Christians and the Sabians, whoever believes in Allah and the last day and does good, they shall have their reward from their Lord, and there is no fear for them, nor shall they grieve. And indeed, the greatest blessing faith gave me was that it liberated me from my fears, fear of failure, fear of death, fear of losing my livelihood, fear of being humiliated by others. Don't fight destiny. Destiny is God, said the Prophet. This text means the past is only to learn from and not to live in, and that the future is to be looked forward to and not feared. You try your best in the given circumstances, whatever happens after that. You accept as the will of God and come to terms with it. Because my profession, rather like that of actors and models, depended so much upon my youth, I used to worry about both aging and dying. What was I going to do after cricket? But I came to realize that your livelihood, your health, and the time of your death were in God's hands. It was all of great help to me during the last 2 years of my sports career. It is very difficult to play professional cricket well if you are not playing all the time. I was only participating in international cricket by that time to help raise funds for the hospital. So it was hard to keep my skills honed, and I was past my prime. And yet, I had more acknowledgement and respect in the last 2 years of my career than before. I only managed to overcome injury and play in the 1992 World Cup because I had lost my fear of failure and leaving cricket in humiliation. In the past, I would never have risked playing in such a high-profile tournament, so injured and so out of form. As the Quran says, "His sufficient is He for him." Within me grew the innate confidence of knowing that respect and humiliation are in God's hands. I used to be so sensitive to criticism, I'd fight with people if I thought they were rude to me. I'd never speak to a journalist again if they wrote something negative about me. A couple of times, I'd even slap one when they were rude to me in public. I masked my shyness with aggression, but my belief in God made me become immune to ridicule. According to the Quran, no human being can humiliate another decent human being. The Greek scholar Socrates, when he was sentenced to death, said more or less the same thing. No evil can happen to a good man, neither in life nor after death. I was always a risk taker, and faith enhanced that. Fear is the biggest impediment to a human being achieving their potential and dreams. During my cricketing career, a lot of talented cricketers never realized their potential because of the fear of failure. Less talented players got far better results simply because of a positive attitude. Some hugely talented batsmen could not do justice to themselves because they were physically scared of getting hit by fast bowlers. In fact, in all aspects of life, fearlessness is an essential quality for success. A soldier who is scared of dying is unlikely to win any medals. A businessman who does not take risks is unlikely to succeed. A leader who lacks courage can never command respect and hence never inspire his team. Most crucially, a leader needs courage to take the big decisions, and big decisions always carry big risks. The difference between a good leader and a bad one is that the former takes huge risks while fully grasping the consequences of failure, while the latter takes risks without a proper assessment of the pitfalls. Successful people never make decisions based on fear. Leaders of a country shaping policies out of fear of losing power have always proved to be disastrous. Great leaders always have the ability to resist pressure and make policies according to their vision, rather than fear. As Iqbal said, the punishment for the crime of cowardice is death. Takdir ke quasi kaye fatwa hai azal se hai jamid zai fi ki saza merge mafajat. Once you learn to overcome your fears, your life transforms because fearlessness breeds idealism. On the other hand, forcing people to be more pragmatic. I am not, of course, saying that people should not be aware of their limitations. In cricket, the first thing I feared was that one could not be successful unless one played within one's limitations at a given point in time. But one should always strive to overcome them. I have always been something of an idealist, never content to accept my apparent limits. When I was just starting out at international level at cricket, I was so inspired in 1972 by watching a fast bowler for the first time, Dennis Lillee, that my ambition became to emulate him. The senior players and my coach at Worcestershire insisted I had neither the physique nor the bowling action to become a fast bowler, and that if I tried to change, I could ruin my career. It was idealism that dared me to take risks. Not only did I completely remodel my bowling action to become a fast bowler, but my body also became stronger for me to bowl fast. No one in international cricket has completely changed their bowling action as I did. As Iqbal says, Gabriel told me at the beginning of time, do not accept the heart that is enslaved by reason. Had Sir Edmund Hillary been a slave to reason, he would never have climbed Mount Everest. Lastly, faith helps you to control your material desire and steals your will. This is part of the inner jihad, the battle between soul and body. I used to consider fasting to be a ritual that was inconvenient and a hindrance to my routine. I would not fast if I was in training, as I would be worried about getting dehydrated. After retiring from cricket, I decided to try and stick to my daily routine, including exercising during Ramadan. By the end of the month of fasting, I felt I had much more endurance and stamina and felt physically cleansed. Much more significantly, it made me realize just how powerful the human will really is. The more you exercise it, the stronger it gets, if done in the right spirit, can be of immense value. There are a lot of Muslims who destroy Ramadan's value by sleeping during the day and staying up eating all night. During the long difficult years I was building the cancer hospital, praying became to me more than a meaningless ritual. I found that prayers were the best way to relieve stress, provided one prayed with the knowledge that there was a God and He was listening. Since the entire burden of fund collection was on my shoulders, I would always assure the senior staff at the hospital not to worry, as I did not want to demoralize them. Then I would head straight to the beautiful mosque in our hospital and pray for help. I always felt relaxed afterwards. Soon praying 5 times a day became a need rather than a duty. I never took for granted the knowledge I'd gained from being placed on the path by Mian Bashir. As I know from my own experience, that it can be argued that just because someone has an extra sense or an ability to predict the future, it doesn't prove that there is a God. After all, some psychics and clairvoyants can get quite a few things right about the future. In the almost 20 years that I knew Mian Bashir, were one of his prophecies ever wrong? Like most people brought up in the West, my ex-wife Jemima was also quite skeptical about this talent. He left her completely awestruck when, without even looking at the piece of paper, he could not read English in any case. He told her exactly what her 3 wishes were. All the truly great people in history, Jinnah, Nelson Mandela, have had a vision and ambition beyond themselves, often achieving more than others, not because of more talent, but because they had bigger ambitions and selfless dreams. The idea of constantly striving towards ever higher goals struck a chord with me, dovetailing with my own philosophy that I had developed through sport. The more you challenge yourself, the more you discover greater reserves of strength within you. The moment you relax and stop pushing yourself is the moment you start going downhill. I first strove to play cricket for Pakistan, then my goal became to be my country's best all-rounder, then the best fast bowler. From there I wanted to become the best all-rounder and the best fast bowler in the world. When I was made captain, the ambition became turning the team into the best in the world. And once the cancer hospital I founded in memory of my mother became a success, I set about building 2 more hospitals, one in Karachi and one in Peshawar. Now my challenge in life is to bring about a socio-economic revolution in Pakistan. I am also building a knowledge city on the pattern of Oxford University in Mian Bashir, the first private sector university in the rural areas of Pakistan. After one goal has been achieved, as Iqbal says, other worlds exist beyond the stars. More tests of love are still to come. My ex-wife Jemima used to ask me how long I would keep pursuing politics without succeeding. But I couldn't answer simply because a dream has no time frame. It does not matter what your education or social background is. You can only fulfill your human potential if you never give up on the pursuit of your dreams. Human contentment is connected to knowing the purpose of one's existence. When one is pursuing one's dreams, even when one is going through outer turbulence, there is always inner peace. During the last decade, I went through some of the most painful and difficult phases in my life. But I always slept well, confident within myself that the resistance I was facing was to strengthen me to achieve my goals. Faith answered 2 of the most important questions, which had always nagged me. Questions that science could never answer. What is the purpose of existence? What happens to us after we die?